Joining us for a conversation is Jayant Bhandari, who is a world-renowned advisor to institutional investors and publicly traded companies. He's also a highly regarded speaker at global investment conferences, and he is the founder of the world-famous Capitalism and Morality. Mr. Bhandari, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me on, Maurice.
Well, it's an absolute delight to be speaking with you. We have a lot to discuss today, from third world economies to investment opportunities and philosophy. Let's get to it. Beginning with third world economies, Mr. Bhandari, you recently visited Sri Lanka, where the country is facing a potential monetary crisis. What is the situation there?
Maurice, I have been to several countries in the last 1 month. I have traveled a lot in the last 2 years of COVID lockdowns. And I was recently in Sri Lanka, which was an interesting trip. It was my first time in Sri Lanka. And what I encountered in Sri Lanka as soon as I landed was something that surprised me. The foreign exchange rates that I was getting at the foreign exchange booth was very similar to the internationally quoted foreign exchange rate, which was 200 Sri Lankan rupees for a US dollar. So I went there with my 100 US dollar, which is the usual thing I do, and got my 20,000 Sri Lankan rupees. Now, what I usually do when I go to a third world countries is to shop around and try to understand their foreign exchange regime. The next day I was walking on the street trying to check out the foreign exchange rates. And what I figured out was that I could get 250 rupees for a US dollar. So I was getting about 25% more cash on the street than I could at the foreign exchange booth at the airport. And the foreign exchange booth at the airport was not scamming me. They were actually quoting the international price. I have an app called XC.com's app, and that tells me the exact rates of foreign exchange. So I knew what the rate was before I arrived. Now that tells me that the country is in a massive financial crisis. It's in a massive foreign exchange crisis. And then you try to go deeper into the situation. You realize that Sri Lanka is in an extremely bad situation. Sri Lanka is heavily dependent on tourism, and for no fault of their own, because international traffic came to a grinding halt, the tourism industry got destroyed. I was going to a five-star hotel for breakfast and dinner, all you can eat, fabulous buffet breakfasts and dinners, and I was paying let's say anything between $6 to $8 per meal, including the tips. So imagine going to a five-star restaurant, having a fabulous breakfast for $6, all you can eat. So that's the kind of situation Sri Lanka is in. Its economy is falling apart, and their tourism sector stands destroyed. And that's a very sorry thing to see about Sri Lanka.
Now, is there a potential for contagion in the region?
There is no potential for contagion, Maurice, because each of these third world countries are falling apart independently. So you could call it contagion, but they are just falling apart independently. And people have to take a higher altitude perspective on what's been happening with the third world. You don't want to go into glorification of the third world, that their time has come, they are developing countries and they are going to rule the world. None of that is going to happen. There has been no moral awakening in the third world. There is no enlightenment happening in the third world. The only thing that is happening in the third world is massive increase in materialism. People just want more and more money, and when you only have materialism increasing without a moral fabric, what actually happens is that it fragments the society even more. And that's what you see in the third world. The third world culturally and socially is falling apart. Now, if you take a higher altitude view of the third world, you realize that economic growth of the third world has been completely hinged to the economic growth of the first world. Third world countries were growing only because of the free gift of the first world countries and the protection and sense of security, what we call Pax Americana, provided by the United States. Now, the United States is getting weak, rapidly very weak actually, and which means that international security is rapidly deteriorating, and the whole of the Western world is stagnating, which means that the hinged part, which has been the third world, has no more ways to continue to grow economically. But it doesn't really matter whether you grow economically or not, because look at Turkey, look at the Middle East. They grew the most. Turkey grew the most in the last decade, exactly when fanaticism was growing rapidly in Turkey. And look at the Middle East. A lot of Middle Eastern countries were twice as much rich in 1970s than they are now, which means that they had a certain capacity to grow, and then they simply don't have the nutrients within their societies to continue to grow economically. Now, IMF and the World Bank will fool you with their spreadsheets showing how a certain amount of growth rate will take them to US level and in certain amount of time, but then you realize that some South Arabian countries were richer than America in 1970s, and now they are much less richer than America today. So third world countries are falling apart. Their economic growth has stopped and has actually got much worse. Actually, their economic GDP per capita today is lower than what it was 3 or 4 or 5 years back. So that's the situation with the third world. But the most important part is that the social and cultural fabric of the third world has completely fallen apart. They have gone completely feral. Everyone is self-centered, everyone is materialistic, and that's the only thing they are chasing, which means that these societies in the third world will just fragment, fall apart, and go into massive chaos, barbarism, and savagery as time goes by. Now, of course, there were very rare third world countries that emerged out of it, and they were the only third world countries that had the capacity and the potential to become first world countries, and those are Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and increasingly China. Apart from that, forget about the rest of the third world. The only third world country that I think has a potential to become first world country at some point of time in the future is North Korea. But every other third world country will just continue to become worse as time goes by.
Now that's interesting. You referenced North Korea there. Is there any reason why you alluded to North Korea?
Yeah, because look at South Korea. The day Kim Il-sung is no longer the head of North Korea, I expect that the next leader would be weaker. That's the way the world works. So eventually they will have a weak leader, and at that time the society will find itself capable of breathing more easily. And when that happens, economic progress will kick in very rapidly. Remember, they have China in the north and South Korea in the south, and they and South Korea speak the same language, which means that South Koreans will start using North Korea as their back office and get the cheap work done in North Korea. And what you will see is what happened when West Germany and East Germany merged together. The poor part of the total entity will start doing the cheaper part of the work, and their economic growth will get very high. But also the key thing is the culture of Confucianism that exists in that East Asian region, in Korea, in China, in Japan. There's a culture of thrift, there's a culture of hard work, there's a culture of honor. And that means that once the tyranny is gone, North Korea will get infused over a couple of generations. It won't happen overnight. Over a couple of generations, infused with the values of South Korea, and it will grow very rapidly. But North Korea is the only exception I see. There is no other hope from any other third world country.
Now, besides Sri Lanka, you've been traveling to Mexico quite frequently, and I have to ask you, why?
I love Mexico for myself. Maurice, I can bitch about these third world countries, but I could easily find a home for myself in one of these third world countries. Mexico has been great. Firstly, the current president of Mexico has been, despite being a leftist, and I usually don't like leftists, but despite being a leftist, he has had a more enlightened policy to do with COVID. There is no requirement to do with PCR test if you go to Mexico, and they have never had it in the last 2 years. You could fly in and out of Mexico without any need for PCR test as far as the Mexican government is concerned. And the only thing they had was a stupid form that you had to fill in, which you had to keep it yourself without ever being asked to show that form. But even that form requirement has gone. So Mexico has been completely open as far as COVID restrictions are concerned. So I have found a good place to spend my time where I am relatively free from extremely crazy COVID restrictions of countries like, say, Canada, New Zealand, or Australia. And of course, I'm currently in the US, and US has been a great country in many ways, but Mexico has been extraordinarily great. Now, remember, when I can say bad things about Mexican economy and the future of Mexico, but I can still find it a good place for myself. And the reason is, Maurice, that I can go to Mexico City, stay, or other parts of Mexico, and I've been to many different parts of Mexico, stay in a very nice area, eat fabulous food every day at half or 1/3 of what I pay in the US. And if I shop around, I probably would pay only 10% or 20% of what I would pay in the US. So for me, within Mexico, I can carve out a lifestyle for myself, which can be more free and more inexpensive, and my quality of life can be very nice in a country like Mexico. But that does not mean it reflects on the general population of Mexico. So this is where a lot of people take erroneous decisions. They go to a poor country from a first world country and they say, wow, alcohol is so cheap, food is so cheap, lifestyle is so good. But it is lifestyle from your perspective as a Western person. You have to understand the country itself, you have to understand the lifestyle from the perspective of the local guy. And from that perspective, Mexico is not a great country if you see it from the perspective of the local guy. But for me, Mexico is great because I take my US dollars with me.
Well, and I think you somewhat answered my question here because, and this is a question I receive frequently. If Mr. Bhandari is a world traveler and he goes to many destinations and they seem to be third world countries, which you're quite critical of, why then do you visit them? And I think you answered it for us right there.
Yes, mostly. And, as I said about Sri Lanka is falling apart economically. But for me, it has actually improved substantially. I was staying in a four-star hotel in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, for something like $35. I was eating out at the best places in the city for less than $10 each meal. My taxis in Colombo would cost me mostly less than $1 from one place to another. So for me, the lifestyle becomes better while the country was falling apart. So I have to make sure that my own perception, my sensual perception of the country does not distract me from the reality of what is happening, which is that Sri Lanka, as it falls apart, is becoming better for me, but for the local guy, of course, it's falling apart.
You shared something with me offline that I found interesting regarding your travel arrangements. You seek flights that will take you a long time to get to your destination. I've never heard of anyone seeking to get to their destination in this manner. Why do you choose this option?
Oh, that's very easy, Maurice. When I go to look for a flight ticket, most people look for the cheapest flight ticket that takes you from point A to point B in the minimum possible hours. I actually scroll down to see which ticket I can get that is not only the cheapest, but takes me the longest to go from point A to point B. If I take a 60-hour flight, I would have broken my trip into three distinct parts: an 8-hour flight with a 20-hour stay in a city, another 8-hour flight with a 20-hour stay in a city, and then arrive at my final destination reasonably refreshed. I could read for during those 2 or 3 flights. I could walk around a new city during my breaks, experience either a new country, a new city, or hang around with my friends in those 2 cities. And if I don't have friends, just hang around by myself and understand the local culture and the economy. So for not only a cheap flight, I minimize my jet lag. I ensure that I pay the least amount of money for my flights, and I experience traveling the world. I have been to 100 countries, and a lot of those countries I have been to this way, which is that I don't even have to pay for it, but I save money to go to those countries.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. Now, just out of curiosity, I have to ask you, do you prefer a window or an aisle seat?
Oh, I hate the window seat because if you look at the window seat, as it goes, the wall of the plane goes down, it shrinks in at the bottom, which means that your leg space is restricted at the window seat, and there's usually that box in front in front of your feet.
Yes.
And I'm talking about the economy class, of course. So window seat is probably the worst. The middle seat actually might give you a better leg space, but you might have 2 sweaty people on both your sides. The best seat, from what I have seen, is the aisle seat. And whenever I check in, I very politely ask if they could give me an exit row aisle seat. And Maurice, this is amazing. Half of the time they give me exit row aisle seat because hardly anyone asks for it. Several airlines charge you for exit row aisle seat, but if they have a capacity, they might give it to you free of cost, or often they don't charge for it even now, and they will just give it to you. And so I get a very good leg space that way. I have the freedom of movement, and I just enjoy being on exit row aisle seat.
You referenced foreign exchange earlier. Are there any tips that you can share with us on how to purchase foreign exchange for traveling?
Yes, Maurice, this is, again, talk about Sri Lanka, Colombo. I was exchanging my money on the street. I was getting 250 Sri Lankan rupee for each dollar of mine. But all these other travelers were going to the ATMs and taking out their money, which meant that they were not only getting the official exchange rate, which was 200, but less than that because they had to pay ATM fees and other charges. So they probably ended up with 195 rupees for each dollar. I was getting 250 rupees for each dollar. And this is what you have to consider when you go to a third world country. You have to shop around on the street because their currencies are not free trading. And because their currencies are not free trading, the real price on this, the value of the US dollar on the street is different from what is in the official exchange system, which is the banks and the ATMs and the airport currency exchange people. So when going to the third world countries, always shop around for what best you can get, and the difference between official and unofficial could be easily 25% or more. Now, when I go to countries where US dollar is pretty much pegged to the local currency, as is the case in, let's say, Bahrain or United Arab Emirates or Hong Kong or even Singapore, because it's not really pegged, but it's almost pegged. What happens in those countries is that you can go to an exchange counter, look for an exchange counter where the spread is very low. But let me explain what the spread is. The spread is the difference between the buy price of the local currency and the sell price of the local currency. Now, if you go, let's say if I go to a bank in the US and want to convert my 100 American dollars to Canadian dollars, they will, and I was checking the rates before I started talking with you, I would get 124 Canadian dollars for each 100 American dollars. But if I wanted to convert my Canadian dollars into American dollars, I would pay 130 Canadian dollars to get 100 American dollars. So suppose I walked into the bank, converted my 100 American dollars into Canadian dollars, and then a minute later just converted whatever Canadian dollars I had back into American dollars, I would be left with only 94 American dollars. So 6% would have been the fees that the bank would have charged me. Mm-hmm. Now, if I go to Hong Kong or let's say United Arab Emirates, the difference that I would lose would probably be 0.3% or 0.2%. So it's not worth going to an ATM in countries like Hong Kong or UAE because the currencies are pegged, and I don't want to pay that 5 or 6% bank spread, bank commission. So that's the thing I do with countries that are pegged with American dollars. But then once it comes to, let's say, countries in like Japan or European countries, usually the best option is to just use the ATM. So because they are free trading currencies and not pegged to American dollar, you can easily go to the ATM, but I actually use a better option there as well. And what I do is that using a professional foreign exchange services, so you can, on internet, there are companies like Interactive Brokers, and there are several more. You can convert your US dollar into another currency, let's say euro, at almost no loss of money, which means that there's no spread between buy and sell. You only pay about $2 to convert your money. So let's say if you converted $10,000, you would save $500 by converting into another currency on a system like Interactive Brokers, and then transferring it to a bank account that offers you a multi-currency debit card or credit card. And when you have a multi-currency card, your bank might allow deduction of whatever you are spending in, let's say, euro, from the euro account that you have within your multi-currency debit card system. So again, you can save money there. Remember, Maurice, if you can save about 3 to 6% of your money by making sure you understand this foreign exchange mechanism properly, that's a huge saving. 5% is a massive amount of money, in my opinion.
Oh, that's brilliant. I have an account there, so I know exactly what the prices are. You're correct. It's $2 to doing a foreign exchange, and then that was brilliant on how to convey it then to a card, and the delta there that you're saving. Oh, that's day and night. Thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, speaking of traveling, do you foresee travel restrictions easing up, and if so, when?
Oh, traveling restrictions are already easing up. As I said, Mexico has had very limited restrictions, and even those are gone. United Arab Emirates is relatively easy to go to. I think Sweden and Norway have significantly eased up their traveling. And slowly these countries will open up, and there will be a domino effect, which means that countries that don't open up quickly will face the consequences of getting left out. And add to that the fact that Canadian truckers have led liberty movement this year. They have encouraged people around the world who are against these absolutely crazy tyrannical mandates to be reduced. So thanks to Canadian truckers, we might have another impetus on removing the mandates and unnecessary restrictions on people's lives. And add all these things together, I think in February or sometime within a month, 2022, we should have most of the restrictions to do with COVID gone. And that's what I'm expecting. I think the world will open up from traveling perspective very rapidly. Now, I know Canadian Prime Minister has imposed an emergency act, which is absolutely crazy. Because he did not do the same thing when the climate change protests were blocking the same highways, or when this so-called Antifa was creating chaos in Canada. But now that these relatively non-violent truckers were disrupting traffic, and I know I'm against public protests, I'm against honking and public disruption in the public space, but they have been among the most peaceful people compared to Antifa and climate change people. But it's still Justin Trudeau, in his extreme intelligence, has imposed emergency act against these relatively peaceful people. But these relatively peaceful people, very peaceful people, wonderful people, and I thank them enormously for what they have started, the Canadian truckers. Trudeau will lose because these truckers are not giving up.
Now, as these restrictions ease, what type of impact will it have on global economies?
Well, firstly, look at the airports, Maurice, and as I said, I have traveled a lot. It now takes about, I would say, 5 times as much time to check in than it used to before COVID. And the reason is that the check-in guy now wants to check all your PCR tests, verify that the test is appropriate. He might not, depending on how and where you are traveling, want to know about your vaccination certificate. And even if you don't have it, don't require it, he will ask for it. And then you have to negotiate with the check-in person why the vaccine certificate is not required. And whether you have the test, which is a PCR test or rapid antigen test, has to be negotiated with the check-in counter guy. And then the manager comes in. So you easily spend 4 to 5 times your time for check-in, which means that if these restrictions stay in place, the check-in areas have to be 5 times larger with full traffic happening through the airport. Now, that's not possible. You have to completely destroy the airports and redesign them for check-in purposes. So these check-in restrictions have to go, but they are not going to go easily, which means that there will be a massive, massive chaos at check-in counters as travel opens up. The amount of cash that people have been hoarding will keep coming to the market, which means inflation will hit. But because we have destroyed the supply chains and we have discouraged people from working, there is not enough productive capacity in the society, which means that stagflation will happen. So there is a lot of chaos coming. Don't be prepared for it. It's not going to be easy. And it will be, globalization has been fragmented. It is no longer working right now. And in a way, it's a good thing because we should think about having more localized people dependent on localized supplies rather than international supplies. But we have a very complex globalized system right now, and it's not working very well. So there will be a huge amount of chaos as we open up.
You referenced stagflation and inflation. Let's talk to the individual that's listening here today about an insurance policy that they can use. How do precious metals factor into this discussion?
Well, it's a no-brainer, Maurice. Look at the gold price. Gold refuses to go below, let's say, $1,800 today. And as you have seen over the last few days, gold price has been reasonably strong. Now, today it might have fallen because of Russia-Ukraine tension easing up. But I think what has now taken a firm grip on people's psyche is that inflation and its stagflation are here to stay. Now, they might not think in those words, but they are afraid of what's happening in the economy. Jobs will be fewer. Jobs that are available will not have enough people working in those jobs. Supply chains and cost of productions are rising because of bureaucracy, COVID restrictions, and destruction of globalized infrastructure. So you will have a stagflation, and it will impact economies and monetary system. And one way to protect yourself is through precious metals. And I think a lot of people are already paying attention to it. The reason why gold price has been either consolidating or becoming stronger.
Now, to be clear here, you're not referring to an ETF. We're talking about the physical metal being in your possession. Is that correct?
I am not a big fan of gold ETFs. You lose, 0.3, 0.4% of your gold every year. I would rather buy physical gold and hold it within my possession, and it will stay my own gold. It would not be electronic gold, which I might not get in a crisis situation or in a time of need. Now, look at Maurice, what Canada did yesterday. Canadian government imposed an emergency act, and now, without an approval of the court, bank, without any instruction from the government, can independently freeze your account right away. Now, it's hard to believe that this is happening in Canada. I'm not exaggerating at all. You look at what Canadian Prime Minister said yesterday. They can freeze your account right away. They can freeze your stock market account right away. What would happen if your gold ETF, it belongs to you, but if it gets frozen up, what use would that be to you? So you have to have physical gold in your possession, or at least enough physical gold in your possession that you can live on for a few months.
I often remind individuals that are looking at ETFs is that if you're looking for the precious metal as the insurance, when you sell it, you don't receive back the precious metal, you receive the currency which you're trying to insure against. So it somewhat defeats the purpose.
Yeah, you have to be very careful about the tyrannical system that has been evolving, the control system that has been evolving. And as I said, most of our money these days is in electronic form, and the governments can freeze your money. And certainly Canada has taken that extremely tyrannical step to enable them, not just enable them, but even the local bank manager to just freeze your money. And then you can fight around to get your money back if you have any cash left in your pocket, because you could be a billionaire, but if it's all frozen, how would you pay the lawyers and the court system to get out of your frozen money? It's just a crazy situation. You have to have accounts outside your own country of residence, and you have to have physical gold or access to wealth that you can use when a time of crisis comes. And physical precious metals is a great way to protect, diversify and protect yourself.
And I have to ask you, do you prefer, and I think I know the answer here, but gold and or silver?
I mostly think in terms of gold, but silver and other precious metals are great ways to protect your capital. Remember, the spread between buy and sell of silver is, I think, usually higher. So gold is probably more liquid from that perspective, that the spread is lower, and it's easy to carry gold. Also, gold is more of a precious metal than silver is, because silver has many other usages. So its price can be a function of several other things happening in the market apart from just monetary policy changes. So that is why I pay a lot more attention to gold than to silver.
And as a reminder, I'm a licensed representative to buy and sell physical precious metals through Miles Franklin Precious Metals Investments. Give me a call at 855-505-1900, or you may email maurice@milesfranklin.com. Switching gears, Jayant, when it comes to arbitrage opportunity, your name is second to none. Do you see any arbitrage deals that we should consider?
There's one company called LaSalle Exploration. The ticker in Canada is LSX. LSX, and it's trading. You can buy if you bid for it at 8.5 cents Canadian. My guess is you should be able to accumulate a lot of these shares. They are going to complete a merger with Harfeng Exploration by the end of March. There is an arbitrage of about 10 to 15% in LaSalle Exploration LSX. But moreover, I have owned Harfang Exploration for a long time. I think there's a very nice upside in owning. There was already a nice upside in owning Harfang, but the merger with LaSalle Exploration, which actually combines two projects which were actually contiguous into one. So this is truly a win-win combination. So there is an economies of scale in this merger. So the upside goes up even further. What I have done, Maurice, of course, is to sell my Harfang Exploration shares and buy LaSalle Exploration because not only I stay back in the merged entity, but I enter it at a lower price than than what I was invested in earlier.
That's brilliant. Brilliant philosophy of investing. I've benefited, and I know a number of our audience members have benefited from your arbitrage deals that you've shared with us in the past. Now, we've saved the best for last, and that is philosophy. And I can't think of any person that is more passionate about the subject than you. Why have you dedicated much of your life's passion to philosophy, and why should each of us listening consider the subject?
Well, because, Maurice, I grew up in a shithole, a hellhole called India, where there is no concept of moral consciousness. People have no understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Everything is based on might is right. And as a result, how people operate, even within families, is through expediency and might is right. There is no social cohesion in that society. And that meant that even as a child, I was wondering about why the Western countries and countries like Japan, Singapore, and Hong Kong were doing so well. They were, 20 to 50 or 100 times richer on per capita basis than an average Indian was. And I used to wonder about what was it so significantly different between the first world and the third world. And I started to realize, Maurice, that the difference was in the moral fabric of these societies. Now, I know there are some virtue signalers, crocodile people who shed crocodile tears, talking about how spiritually advanced the third world is. No, the third world is a rotten cesspool of amorality and immorality. There's nothing redeeming about the third world. So I was thinking about what was it about the first world that made it so good. And at the end of the day, the reason the first world, Europe and America, became so good was because of the moral fabric they created, largely based on Christianity and Greek Roman philosophy, and the concept of honor, integrity, compassion, tolerance, all mixed together. The concept of accountability, the concept of individuality and self-responsibility that these people created was the true fundamental difference between the first world and the third world. So that's where my interest in philosophy comes from, because without that moral fabric, without those key ingredients, society cannot become better, cannot economically progress. Economy is not everything, Maurice, but it's a symptom of the underlying spiritual and moral awakening in the society.
Mr. Bhandari, you're the founder of Capitalism and Morality, a philosophical forum which is focused on reason, argumentation, and liberty. For someone new to Capitalism and Morality, tell us more about the event.
Well, Maurice, except for the last 2 years, I have been running this seminar in Vancouver downtown during summer every year for the last 10, 12 years. Now, of course, I have not been able to run it for the last 2 years. I do hope I can somehow run it this year. But it's a seminar in which I want to highlight what is great about the Western civilization, what's great about the Western philosophy. And I must say that Western civilization and Western philosophies are the only civilization and the only philosophies. The countries outside the West never had philosophy and did not have civilization. So I want to highlight what is great about the West and why it is paramount that we preserve it, because without Western civilization and without Western philosophy, we are no more than animals.
Has a date been established and some of the featured speakers?
Yes, a date has been established, Maurice, and we will have a wonderful lineup of people like Walter Block, Jeff Deist of Mises Institute. We will have Mark Victor from the US. He's an attorney who fights for liberty of people. We will have Adrian Day and Rick Rule, both mentors of mine. We will have Doug Casey, my philosophical mentor, and we will have many other speakers at the seminar.
And just out of curiosity, how about Albert Liu?
Albert Liu, again, a great friend, and whenever he speaks, people come to me and say, hey, I'm amazed that Albert Liu is not one of the anchors on the major television show. And that's the kind of personality Albert Liu has. He's an amazing speaker. The audience loves him. He wakes people up, and he intrigues audience with his humor. So he is another speaker that we have. But I must warn Maurice that while I'm extremely thankful to Canadian truckers who might enable my seminar to go ahead this year, but Justin Trudeau has been extremely tyrannical. And if that continues by the time the seminar is to be held, then I may have to shift the seminar to either the US or Mexico.
Well, let's hope for the better here, because I'm looking forward to attend here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And just for for just sharing this with our audience members here, before I was introduced to your work, admittedly, I overlooked the significance of how important the role of philosophy plays in our daily lives. And it's right there. It's right before us, and yet many of us, we just can't articulate it. And attending Capitalism and Morality over the years has provided such clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, you owe it to yourself. Visit the YouTube channel, Capitalism and Morality, grab some coffee, click play, and enjoy. Now, in closing, sir, what did I forget to ask?
Well, we have had a lot of conversation about the third world, Maurice, and I might add that I have been going to India quite a bit more than my usual visits over the last 6 months. Well, last 1 year. I have spent 6 months over the last 1 year in India. And I tell you, I have been completely wrong about India. I have said very bad things about India. I have told you what it is. And I tell you what, India is 100 or 1,000 times worse than it is. And I have been working on a project, meeting some very top officials in the country. And I tell you, it is rotten to the core. It's a cesspool of sewage that is rotting away. From top to bottom, the only interest of every single bureaucrat and politician is how much money you can give him as a bribe. And bribing happens right in the open, in public space, everywhere. There is absolutely no concern for the other human being. These people can sell their daughters and wives into prostitution if they could make more money. So that's how rotten India is. And that's how rotten the rest of the third world is. I am just truly amazed that I was relatively naive by just calling India a hole. It's just so much worse. Now that I have experienced India again after 17 years of my stay away from it.
Last question. What keeps you up at night that we don't know about?
I hope the Western civilization wakes up to the horrendous problem that the third world will be for them in the future. And the third world imported culture, which is wokeism, that will be for the future of the first world. So I hope we can avoid it, because Biden, Kamala Harris, Justin Trudeau, these are not representatives of Western civilization, Western philosophy. They are representatives of third world, immoral societies. They are woke people, and woke people are actually feral. They are no different from the people of the third world. And I hope that under their leadership, the leadership of Justin Trudeau and Biden, we don't convert the West into third world countries.
Mr. Bhandari, for someone that wants to learn more about your work, please share the website address.
Everything that I do goes on my website, which is jayantbhandari.com.
Mr. Bhandari, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Wishing you the absolute best, sir.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Maurice.
The information presented on Proven and Probable is provided for educational and informational purposes only, without any express or implied warranty of any kind, including warranties of accuracy, completeness, or fitness for any particular purpose. The information is not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice, or any other advice. You should not make any financial, investment, or trading decision based on any of the information presented without first undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional broker or competent financial advisor.